Today's discussion is on self-defeating habits and how we can overcome them. Because all the good input in the world is not going to make any difference if you don't change that which is fundamentally flawed within your behavior. Now, there are several ways of going about this, and one is just to be very honest about the part of your nature that you generally want to hide or have hidden even from yourself, where you're not even aware of what you're saying and what you're doing or the consequences of what you say and do. Example, last night there was a rally against the FDA here in New York City, and there was a pretty good turnout. Pretty good meaning, I'm guessing, between 500, 700 people. It could be more, could be less, because people were coming and going. But at one point, the whole block was packed, and it was packed as many as 30, 40 deep. So I'm guesstimating about that many. And I asked some people who were there, and they said, I've never attended a rally before, I've never gone to a demonstration before, I've never protested before. And people from all age groups, some in their 30s, some in their 60s. And I thought for a moment, I said, well, good for you. And I complimented to encourage them that, I'm glad to see that you've done something. And then the other thought was, there are at least 600,000 people who listen to my show who are not here, who weren't protesting the New York Times, who weren't in Washington, who've never protested anything in their life. Now, they are not oblivious to what's wrong. They're clearly just as informed as you or I or anyone else. They choose not to at any time create discomfort. They're very aware of what happens when you're given the reward for obediency and you're given the punishment for challenge. It doesn't take long as a child to see that the child that says, yes, Mommy, yes, Daddy, and does what I call negative, virtuous living. You back through life, never making a mistake or trying not to or not showing any flaws or mistakes, but you never take a chance. And as a result, inside, there's this sense of self that never gets actualized. You never do what's really important for the essential self. That can end up being a person that later in life either is, on the one extreme, an overachiever, or on the other extreme, an introverted, frequently self-depreciating person that allows themselves to be used. So when I talk with these people and say, well, surely you know that your freedoms, as I did one guy today, I said, surely you know your freedoms are being impinged upon, and you make your business from selling vitamins. This was a health food store employee. Why couldn't you have taken the time, since you weren't working, to be there just to show support? The person says, I don't know, but I was with you. No. Don't tell me you're with me in spirit. I don't like this in spirit bullshit, right? Everybody, we're with you. We're so far behind you that when you get hurt, I don't know him. I've never eaten a vitamin in my life. The vitamin police are coming after me. No, either you participate in something or you don't. And the trouble is, we'd like to deceive ourselves and others. We'd like to believe that we are doing something when in actuality we're not. And that's part of what's wrong with our lives. We would like to believe that we really are committed to changing what's wrong, but we never get around to doing it. And so those habits just keep going on. But it's also true that we will at the same time complain, whine, moan. We will fetch about it. We will agonize about it. Now, it's done in two ways. Generally in our society, women will talk openly and passionately, up close, with what's not working in their life. They'll talk about their relationships. They'll also talk about what is working. They'll share the joy of their pleasures. They'll share the agony of their pain. That doesn't change anything, though. That just means that someone else is going to know all about you today. And there's a time when you start thinking, hold on, didn't we have this conversation before? Is this the 3,000th time you're going to tell me what's not working, or what you want to do or are afraid to do? And that's because in our society, women historically have been allowed or encouraged to share this empathy together. There is more of a sense of intimacy in the bonding of needs with women. Men, it's just the opposite. Men rarely complain about what is not working, except as it manifests in their special projects. Men like to preoccupy themselves with a project. They intellectualize their problems. They don't like to show you their vulnerability by explaining or expressing their emotions. So their emotions generally are very, very short range of emotions. Some joy and anger or rage, and otherwise silence, a stoic quiet, even with other men. And ironically, frequently men or women both will be more open to share what is not working with someone that is not an intimate into their life than they are with someone who is intimate. I'll get into that later. Why? Why our wives, husbands, men or women, friends don't know as much about us as someone who is superficially attached to us will. Why are we not open? More importantly, why do we keep rehashing the same ideas and never change them? And that's the process that we're going to be discussing. And that's why I want you to work on this in your book. Write these things out. If you just think about them, thoughts always jump ahead of the details that allow you to figure them out. The thoughts are the big giant strokes that get you from here to here. It's the details that put it all together. Now, let's begin with the idea that if we're going to change something in our life, we want to change what we care about that isn't working, or what we're doing that we don't care about, that we've committed ourselves to. Now, I want you to engage with me in this dialogue. For instance, what are some of the things that you will care about, but you will not do anything about? This guy in the health food store, he makes his living from something that is going to be threatened, and if the law is passed, for instance, that would challenge vitamins, he would lose his livelihood. But he would rather lose his livelihood and complain about it than to go out and do something that would allow him to protect it by showing that he is opposed to the oppressive measures. That's one example. Now, it seems like it's contradictory, but it's not. It's completely natural in the way most people live. What are some of the other things that we will do that we care about but don't do anything about? Our environment. We talk about cleaning up the environment. We all know what pollutes the environment, and yet we continue to pollute it more than ever before. More plastic in the ocean, more garbage on the highways, more effluents going in the air. We have not curtailed the pollution from nuclear power plants, from garbage disposals that are going into the ocean frequently untreated. Corporations will all say that they're a part of environmental consciousness, and yet they're dumping more pesticides than ever before on our crops. They're making more, and we're using more than we ever have before. Now, that's one example. We have a very small environmental movement in this country. If you took away the few people in Greenpeace, as an example, Friends of the Earth, the Audubon Society, and these people with tuberculosis who are polluting it, give me a mask. Have you had your shots? Be honest. No, you have. See, I can always tell. A silent meat eater who's contaminated her body. Now, there's another one. You're related. Everybody right now who has TB, hepatitis, or gonorrhea, go to the back of the room. Anyhow, now all night long you're thinking, I want to cough, but I can't now. Now, if you took just those few organizations away, and we're talking what? Actually, full-time people, maybe 1,000? In this whole country, 1,000 people are all that remains between total abuse of our environment, unrestricted and unrecognized pollution, and our health. Doesn't seem like a lot. I mean, it's all of our world, so why aren't we all committed to it to some level? Why isn't it some priority? Why does an entire infrastructure have to disintegrate to where it no longer functions on any level before someone pays attention to it? We complain about the traffic in New York City. For 35 years, no administration cared about maintenance Forget improvement, no maintenance of the infrastructure of our roads. Now, all of our bridges and roads are in decay, not just needing maintenance, needing completely to be redone. So it's going to be another 30 years and over somewhere around $5 billion to change it because we don't pay attention to it. It's like waking up one day and realizing you look in the mirror and you think, my God, how'd I get this way? I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. Nobody gets fat overnight, right? A marriage doesn't disintegrate overnight. We don't get sick overnight. We don't become alcoholics overnight. We don't become addicts overnight. We don't become compulsive abusers of anything overnight. We're not paying attention to what's essential in our own lives. When you don't pay attention to something, it goes into abuse and then disuse. But when we wake up to finally say, oh, we got a problem, then you don't have a problem. You have a major grade A crisis. We hide everything until crisis point. Why? Because once again in our society, we do not look at changing what doesn't work. Because if we did, it would mean we would first and foremost have to communicate openly and honestly about what we really want from our work, from our relationships, from our family. We would have to change priorities. We would have to look and say, there's only so much time, so much energy, and so much emotion I can put into anything in a given day. Then why am I putting it in these areas? Where should I put it? Now, could you imagine what that's going to do to the people in your life? At work, at home. They're suddenly going to say, hold on a second. We thought we were a part of you. Now you're saying you don't like this, you don't like that. So men have been conditioned that it's not manly to complain. So men don't complain. I grew up in an environment down in West Virginia where no one openly, as men, ever complained about anything. Maybe the football games from the local high schools. That's all you heard them complain about. But everything else they just took as a given. They'd work in a polluted factory, they'd end up with emphysema, a lung cancer, nobody complained. And that's why we have the mess we have with our health today. Because to complain would be show that you were weak or you weren't masculine. So we first have to be honest about what we care about and are not actualizing. Now what's something else? That was a good point. Thank you for the environment. What else? I want to hear you thinking. I want to hear you respond. This is interactive, so give me some feedback. Healthcare. Healthcare. Do you know any healthy people? No. You know one healthy person? All right. You know one. I shouldn't be a healthy person, no one else. I know no other healthy people. I know of no one in the entire world I would call a healthy person, based upon my standards of health. And I've looked at this issue 1,000 times, because they might be healthy in their diet, or they might be healthy intellectually. But when you look at the different levels of our being, all of which require being healthy, to be whole, there's always major parts that have been denied: time and access and actualization. It's like saying, look at that car. Look at the shine on that door. It is. You have shined that. Man, you can see your face in there. Why did you stop with the door? I mean, the rest of the car is all rusted and bent and bruised and the engine's gone and, you know, you get it up on cinder blocks. Well, hey, I did my bit. I mean, I did the door. I work. You see, we rationalize. We've gotten so used to lowering our standards with everything in life that our standard now for everything is whatever the lowest common denominator is. So when we look at a campaign and everybody's doing negative campaigning, we think that's a normal way to campaign. Now that is the only way you hear campaigning. Last night there was a debate on NAFTA, all right, and all they did was bash each other. And whoever did the best bashing was the person people thought would win. And this is how we elect people to office. Whoever is the most negative or successful at being negative. We've accepted that as a normal standard. Look in broadcasting. We accept in broadcasting that broadcasters will do these shows where every time you turn on television now with one of these shows, you see cops going on with a video camera right into drug or a crime scene, as if we need to see that, as if that's entertainment. Now that's considered entertainment. Watching people in the act of violence or victims of violence is considered entertainment. The media considers it entertainment because they're giving us what people are watching. If people didn't watch it, they wouldn't show it. They will show what the public demands. People watch WrestleManias. So there's a demand, they show it. People want to watch tires the size of the Empire State Building go over cars. And have you ever wondered what's going on here? Have I missed something intellectually, emotionally, culturally? Have I gotten left out of something that everybody else seems to really go for? I mean, people actually get, you know, the jackets, and these people become little heroes because they can drive over cars. You know, like, yeah, I drove over, you know, we went over 565 cars in 3.5 seconds, and this little tiny cab, gigantic, people love that. They come from every trailer park in America to see this. See? And I'm wondering, this is what people want? Yes, that's the common denominator. That happens in a lot of different institutions. Whatever the standard is in a general institution, the paradigm has accepted that that is what is permissible. As long as someone is profiting from that standard, it will not raise itself automatically. The people within it may raise themselves above the normal standards. If you want to get a good education, you must do that. We do not have institutions, generally speaking, that have high standards in teaching. We don't even have intelligent curriculums. We have people graduating from college who are at 9th grade and 8th grade reading levels, writing levels. I was a teacher in a college in New York City where 2 of my students never once stepped foot in my class. They sat outside the entire time and were laughing, and the other students worked. But had I had to grade that class on just grades, 80% would have failed. I had to use a curve, and it was the largest curve I've ever used. But at least they tried. They honestly tried. Those 2 out in the class, when I asked them, I said, look, can I help you with something? What don't you like about the class? I mean, I've had classes where I haven't even used a textbook because the people weren't using the textbook. If they're not going to use the textbook, then obviously if I want to teach them anything, I can't teach them if they're not willing to read, if they're not willing to do homework. So I've been as creative as I could be. They said, no, we don't have to attend class. I said, well, I'm sorry, you do have to attend class. No, we don't. They were right. I went to write an incomplete, and I was called into the dean's office. He said, sorry, Gary, you got to pass them. I said, no, I don't. They didn't go to school. They were out. They never stepped foot in my classroom. He says, you don't understand. This is New York City, and they are minority. You must pass them in. If you don't, you're going to get fired. He was right. I was wrong. They won. They passed. And I found out everyone else had to pass them. 2 people who never attended a class in college and got out. And so I went into the other class and I says, what do you think of this? Because this denigrates you. You know, this is an abuse against you who are trying. Because what it says is you don't have to study. You could all go out and sit out there and you could all pass because the politics of the system in New York City is so decrepit, it is so putrefied with corruption that that's the standard. And they were offended by the idea that those people were getting away with what they knew they could push the system. Now, could they have gotten away with that 20 years ago? No, they couldn't. Could they get away with that everywhere in America? No, but in every major city they could. There's not a major city in America that you can't get through college if you don't want to go to school, if you know how to intimidate. And there's always a lawyer who's willing to intimidate. You know what kind of character they are. All right? So that's what we're faced with. Those are the standards. Despicable standards. The standards in our healthcare system, where doctors will see thousands of patients die from an experimental therapy and won't bother them at all. No one will go up to the drug companies and say, we're not going to experiment anymore with your drugs. They won't do that. Why won't they do that? Why? Anyone who knows of a crime and does not raise their voice against it is equally responsible as a person who commits it. And we are a society where we all know that our entire society, from top to bottom, in every institution, is corrupt. There is not an institution you can name that I cannot detail point after point after point corruption. I can show you every one of the Fortune 500 corporations and the deals they make and their multi-international dealings of how they do not care about human rights. In fact, I was thinking last night, I was going to get up to give part of my talk last night to this demonstration. I was thinking, do you know how stupid we are? Now, just for a moment, just on a street sense I'm talking about. Do you realize that you could all be successful, beyond your imagination, wealthy? You could be virtually criminal-proof if you were willing to work for those corporations and those individuals who are part of that multinational political, economic, philosophical clique that seems to control everything, all the special appointments for federal agencies, all the ambassadorships, it seems, all the different corporate contracting companies, all come from a relatively small clique of companies, about 27 companies. You never see any of them ever being brought up on charges personally, no matter what the crime. If they pollute the environment, it's a tax write-off. They're making such profits that now they just don't pay as much profit, and it's a slap on the wrist. No one goes to jail. No one is held accountable for their actions. You could do anything. You could kill. You could go in and destroy indigenous people. You could destroy the environment. You could deforest. You could take away land that belonged to other people. You could do anything because they control the system. They control the Attorney General. They control justice. They control everything. Think of all the rewards that come from being a part of that. Now that's very tempting when you know that you can maintain this outside facade of being philanthropic or socially responsible or a provider or trustee at universities. You're invited to all the right parties. You're respected. But underneath, there is this foment, this black-hearted nature, this deep, bottomless pit of a spirit that you have yet to connect with. And you alone know, and your confederates, and your secret societies and fraternities, that you are judgment-proof. No one can judge you. No one can condemn you. You are above it all. And we actually have that. That's not a myth. That exists. So you can see in some respects, people know this. People know you don't mess around with power. You don't mess around with people who control your lives. You become like children in the presence of authority. Every time you get pulled over for a traffic violation, suddenly you become, yes, officer, I'm a little itty-bitty baby. I will not, was I really? Can't wait to pay the ticket. We accept that authority immediately creates an impotence in us. And so even when we know that they're not smarter, they're certainly not more intuitive, they're certainly not more correct, we acquiesce. Now, if you've been a part of any system whose power and control has benefited you in some way, even if it's been as a dictator or totalitarian or extremist, then the likelihood is you're not going to speak up. You're going to keep your mouth shut. Nobody wants to be excluded for something that they feel is so essential to be a member of. So you see, it's not just money. Think deeper. It is primal. We love to belong. We love to belong to tribes and guilds and clubs and fraternities and sororities and societies. We love to be attached to something. It takes a very unique person to want to be autonomous and still connected to a society. Instead, we all fold into the society, even when we know that many things can be changed, should be changed, but they're not. They're simply not, because the way things are done. And it's only for those few who decide that they can stand up, that any change at all occurs, or even that our consciousness is raised. So there's messages out there, and that goes back to what I said. These messages start earlier on in life. When you're told, you will do as you're told. And all that has to happen is a few times. You're helpless, you're vulnerable, you're a little child. You cannot intellectualize. All you can do is feel. And you get the message. If I disobey, I'm going to be punished. If I obey, there's a reward. Even if the reward is not being punished. And so as a result, the real essence of our being, what should be expressed, isn't expressed. We hold it in. And later, when we see this as adults, when we see something at work, you're the only guy on your team that's really working in your factory. And then you're told, hey, what are you doing? You want to make us look bad? You slow down. Yeah, but if I slow down, I mean, we shouldn't be slowing down. We're already slowed down. If we're any slower, we might as well be, slugs out here. Yeah, but man, don't rock the boat. So you realize you rock the boat, you're excluded. Do you want to be excluded? It's a very powerful thing to be excluded. It is paradigm. We are talking about most problems we face today are based upon your inability to accept unconditionally everything within your paradigm. And yet you know that much in your paradigm is inherently wrong, but you have yet to find the confidence to challenge it or to make changes or to go outside of that paradigm for your livelihood, for your friendships, for your rebonding with people, for the answers to your disease. Do you know how many people listen to my radio show every single day, read my books, and yet when they get a disease, the very first thing they do is go to a traditional doctor, and that's how it's taken care of? And I say, but I thought you were listening to... Well, we were, but... Understand what a paradigm is. A paradigm comes from the Greek, paradigma, meaning a pattern. That means that there is this circle. Inside this circle, everything that you're supposed to believe in, all of your needs are supposed to be met. Every question you have must be answered inside that paradigm. The paradigm allows that you will have problems. The paradigm itself creates problems. For instance, if your paradigm is based upon a high economic input, that means that someone has to be continuing to buy things to support the supply side economics. But what if you don't have the wherewithal? Well, then they'll give you credit. Now, as long as you have credit, then you can buy even when you can't afford it. Then they create the idea that you must have things in fashion. So it's not good to have something for more than 3 months, so every 3 months, fashions change. Then they try to convince you that you want to have something that makes you feel good. Well, there's nothing wrong with feeling good, and there's nothing wrong with having things you like and that you like to wear. But then look how they change things so that there's always something new that you then begin to depreciate what it is that you have that you did at one time like. And you all know that you've had things that you just like when you saw them, and then you wore them once or twice, and then you got other things, and you stop wearing those first things, and you have 15 pair of shoes, and you wear 2 pair regularly, right? You have 20 dresses, you wear 3 regularly. Whereas if you were in France, you have 4 dresses and you wear all 4. But you save until you can buy something you really like. We are a disposable society. Therefore, part of our paradigm is continue purchasing. And so that's what we do. And it affects every area of society. It affects the farmer. Don't plant 40 different crops and sell them locally as organic produce and use natural and biological means to protect your soil and from pests and predators. Instead, use this pesticide. Well, no one gets around to seeing that when we were not using pesticides, we had a 4 to 7% loss of crops. Using pesticides, we're losing 22% of our crops. And they're very expensive, and they're toxic. They don't see that when you were raising different crops, you could sell them locally in season throughout the year and keep a cash flow coming. And when you eliminated all that to grow one crop, wheat, corn, or soybeans, 95% of all our crops go to for animal feed, that you were getting a fixed price that never allowed you to make a profit. But your machinery was always breaking down. It was obsolete after 2 seasons. The cost of the machinery and repairs would be picked up by the banks giving you giving you loans that you were hoping you'd be able to repay if you had a good crop. But weather being what it was, you never could make enough to get even. Then you mortgaged your house, then your land. And then we started seeing that today there's so few farmers left, they're not even keeping statistics on them anymore. We've gone from about 3 million farmers back at the beginning of the century to less than 300,000. And at this rate, we will be reduced to about 50,000 farmers and almost all mega farms in the next 10 years, growing single crops. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but it makes sense if you simply continue to believe in the paradigm. You see, paradigms provide us with everything we're supposed to need. They provide us with our beliefs. They tell us, this is what you're supposed to believe. This is your mythology. This is where you came from. So if you, for example, if you go to some of the Christian fundamentalistic schools and they tell you that that if you are pro-creationist or pro-evolutionary, the world either began, 10 billion years ago or it began 10,000 years ago. Now, it's very hard if you're told that it began 10,000 years ago to reconcile how we have human remains and artifacts that are 27,000 years old from cultures that were believed in the goddess religions. Because before there was a god, there was a goddess religions. And the goddess religions were in power for over 20,000 years. And then when successive invasions occurred, the goddess religions were destroyed and a god took its place. Well, so now all of the patriarchal orders established the mythologies based upon their context of what women's role should be. It was different in pre-God times. So if you believe in God alone, then how do you reconcile that we can show there were religions and before there was God, there was a goddess? All paradigms have weaknesses. All belief systems have weaknesses. Well, the idea is that if you belong to a paradigm, you must overlook all of its weaknesses. You must accept its weaknesses. Remember, the first thing you do when you believe in something is you disengage what it is that is contradictory in what you believe. You overlook it. There's not a person in this room who can tell me that in your relationships, when you decided to commit yourself to the relationship, you gave up looking at what wasn't working in the relationship to accept the relationship. But later on, when it was no longer feasible for you to accept the relationship and you finally gave it up, all those things you overlook are what you now condemn the relationship on. How many times have you had people give you an emotional bill for things that you said, well, why, if you believe this, I was a bad person, why didn't you tell me then? Because once we commit ourselves to anything, we're also committing our ego to it. And our ego will not allow us to admit that we have made a wrong decision. Remember, in our society, you're nobody until you're connected to something. We do not respect autonomy. The only people in America historically that have ever been liked or accepted as being autonomous have been cowboys riding into the West alone on a horse. That's not a threat to anybody. But you can't have anybody else being autonomous. That's dangerous then, because it shakes the structure of a society. Now let's take this one step further. If all paradigms, all belief systems, and they're multiple, you might have hundreds within a society, but they all must accept certain paradigm. In other words, there's the larger paradigm, then within the paradigm there are sub-paradigms. You might have a paradigm in education, and one in religion, and one in business. And in other words, you're going to have to believe in the totality of what you accept. And now it's interesting to watch people overlook everything that is a contradiction to what they believe in that someone else will point out to them. You see, it's very easy when you're not a part of something to see what its limiting function is and limiting factor. You can immediately say, hold on a second. There's this woman who has a family, a part of the Mennonite family down in Pennsylvania, and she finds that there are some questions that she had, and when she took the questions to the elders, which was the only place she was allowed to take them, they rejected her concerns. So she continued to have her concerns. Instead of allowing her to have her concerns, they admonished her and said, if you do not stop this probing, This challenging and showing disrespect for us, now they made it personal, you see. Her question was no longer legitimate. Now it was, she was no longer giving them unconditional acceptance as being the authority, the right. Then we will exclude you. And they did. So effective are some paradigms that in her case, her husband, all of her children rejected her. Everyone in her society rejected her. She was an outcast. All she had done was question the inequity in her belief system. Now, if you're a member of that belief system, that's easy to understand. You've got to exclude anyone who challenges it where it may threaten the people within it. There's nothing worse in any belief system than having an idea that cannot be controlled. Why do you think religion has tried for so long to control your thoughts of what is acceptable to you? Because the one part of your mind, your fantasies, are what could make us different. A dream that we want to explore, believing that we could be anything and anybody, believing we could do anything, believing that we have the power inside of us to change anything. And then one day we wake up and we're told, no, stay in your place. And our families are frequently the first people to teach us that. Why? Because if we believe that we can change the circumstances of our life and be happy, healthy, successful, but if our family members have not been that, and if that's not within their belief system, then we're threatening them. Because we're saying, you've lived an unactualized life. You never became who you really could have been. Instead, you became who your father told you you should be, or your mother, or others. You were obedient. You may not feel the pain because you may have anesthetized yourself to everything that was vital and essential to your own being, your own needs. You were a keeper of the secret of social conformity, family conformity, carrying on tradition. Well, that's a scary notion to a lot of people. You start getting a few people changing, the very first thing we do is try to say, get them back in the line, right? How many times, who in this room has had that kind of situation where you wanted to change and you were quickly told by your own family, this isn't you, this isn't us, right? Look at the hands, right? 80% of the room in here. So you know what I'm talking about. And yet these are the very people who you think, hey, come on, be on my side. You know, life is tough enough. Don't I have some support from you? You're my family. And they're the boom, boom, no, you're wrong this, you're wrong that. Because you then become a reflection of what they may have been had they challenged and tried. They didn't have the courage to challenge and try. They've lived out of fear, and they've tried to blind themselves to being honest that this was not a negative virtue living. You don't want to live with negative virtue anymore. You want to be who you really are. So you don't have all this contradiction, you don't have this conflict, and you're not walking around in 1,000 bits and pieces. A few are balanced and most are not, and trying to have a whole life. They've developed a way of living through it, so by their whole life they'll adapt. When you see people who are adapting and not complaining, it's because they've learned that it is better to adapt to the pain and accept it and make it something other than the pain than to challenge change where there's so much uncertainty and you're going to be excluded from what at least you know you have some connection to. I was speaking with a friend of mine who came up from West Virginia. I'll tell you this story. This guy was a buddy of mine in high school. My buddy in high school was very outgoing, a very fun guy, kind of roll around the edges, still is. I mean, you don't want to ask him a whole lot unless you can accept any kind of answer, because whatever he feels, that's coming out. There's no editing, right? But that's also what made him special, you know? He just said what was on his mind. And sometimes it was sexist, and sometimes racist, and sometimes stupid, but that's okay. I mean, everybody else I've ever met in life also has those same thoughts, except they edit them. But if they feel them, it's still there. He just tells you. At least you know exactly what he's thinking. Well, he got out and he started saying that when you're really honest and you go after what you want, it's not that hard to succeed. And he did. He succeeded. His problem was that at a certain point, he didn't know what to do. You see, freedom only works if you have a way of focusing it to balance the parts of yourself that have not challenged or grown to their higher ideal. And so even though he succeeded, he was frustrated inside because there were no people around he connected with that allowed him to say, hey, come on, what are you doing to grow in this area? Bring yourself up in this area. Have a higher ideal. Remember, we're always going to acquiesce to the standards around us. Now, think of this. Here's a guy, very creative, very honest, very outgoing, who sees that most of the people around him are miserable. Forget the facade, you know, the neatly manicured lawns of suburbia, upper middle class, the homes, the children. Behind those homes, a lot of dysfunction, a lot of anger, a lot of dreams that are never going to be actualized, a lot of resentments. And he, instead of wanting to do anything about it, allowed himself to come down to that standard. Remember, you will frequently come to the standard of people around you emotionally unless you are strong and independent and can resist that and allow their energy to go through you and past you rather than absorbing it. So he became a sponge for all these people. Right? He soaked up their negative energy. Do you know how you feel when you soak up other people's negative energy? You're drained. Right? You feel wiped out. And so then, to disguise his own pain, he started drinking. And then drugs. And then gambling. Totally self-destructive. It's very hard for a very, outgoing guy to destroy themselves. It takes a long time because they're so resourceful. They can con anybody. They can BS all night long. So it took him about 3 years, but he finally hit rock bottom. Lost his family, his job, his career, lost everything in this world. Ended up going from like $150,000 a year job and everything, ended up in the boonies of South Dakota in a halfway house. When I had my reunion, and I went back and I saw these people, and it was very depressing. And it wasn't depressing because I saw the people. I was happy for the people to see them. Many of them I hadn't seen since high school. What was depressing is when I talked with these people, no one had done anything that I remember. I have this curse of having this mind that doesn't forget things. Right? And that's why I can talk on subjects or do a commentary on the radio for an hour or 10 hours. Is because I just keep remembering things. So I can remember conversations when I was 2 years old. I remember when I was a year and 11 months old, sitting on the bed with my mother when she was having some, my younger brother in the hospital, and talking with her about having some lifesavers. She had some lifesavers. She was taking a lifesaver, and a little chocolate lifesaver, and I was asking her about a chocolate lifesaver. I remember those things. And when I was in high school, I used always to ask people, what are you going to do? What do you want to do? And they would tell me. And I remember those things. And when I would look in their faces, there's the guy who wanted to be an artist. There's the woman who wanted to go to New York because she was all caught up in the theater. And I went through all these people. And 99% of them didn't become anything that they said they wanted to. Now that in itself is not bad, and it's not a judgment. But what I found was that their life stopped at high school. At graduation, it ended. They suddenly had to step into the paradigm completely. Up until graduation from high school or graduation from college, you're allowed to believe that you can be anything. You're allowed to believe that, no matter what. But boy, it changes the moment you're supposed to be a part of it. And suddenly they went from being a young, teenager to a mature adult overnight. It just, overnight, it changed. So here was my buddy, and I went by his house and I said, hey, going to the reunion tonight? I hadn't seen him in 20 years. He said, I can't. I said, why not? He said, I don't have the $15 to go. I said, you don't have $15? Mind you, I didn't know what had gone on. And then he told me a story. I said, well, all right. So I'll pay the $15. Let's just go and have some fun. What wasn't fun, it was like going to a funeral. Man, it was a bummer, a real bummer. Whew. You know, especially the people used to be so attractive, and now they, they're all over the place, you know. And, well, of course, everybody had their high school picture on, right? That really made it neat because I wouldn't have recognized anybody. Hi, Bob, my buddy from, yes, we grew up together, Bob. In fact, my best buddy for 12 years I didn't recognize. 12 years. My best buddy until I was 19. I did not recognize. He's about 320 pounds, bald-headed, chins upon chins. I didn't recognize him. And the person says, yeah, I'm happy. Right. Yeah. No. Happy people don't destroy themselves. Not a single person there volunteered to do anything for George. They didn't even want to really talk to him. Evidently, he had been in town for about a month before the reunion, so people knew what his circumstances were. And I just thought, isn't it interesting? No matter what happens to someone, people want to avoid it if in any way it reflects upon them in a negative way. You know, you see quickly who your friends are when you're in trouble, and everybody forgets that they ever knew you. That's true in politics, it's true in any of the commerces, and it's even true in our own lives. Well, George said to me when I was telling him that night, late that night, for me, one very nice thing, there was a woman who helped raise me, who I thought had died 40 years ago. I didn't know she was alive. And her name came up by someone who saw me in the hotel lobby and came over and says, I saw your picture in the paper that you were coming in. And she said, you know, I know someone who said they'd love to see you. Mammy Johnson. I said, Mammy Johnson? She died when I was young. No, she's still alive. Sure enough, I went out and here's this woman, 90 years old, hadn't seen me in all those years, and she gave me pictures of me as a baby and a young boy, and it was just amazing. So it was very, very rewarding for me for that experience. And then I said to George, I said, George, don't you have a lot of feelings about people who could still change their life if they wanted to? He says, Gary, he says, hold on a second. He says, they don't want to. They're happy where they're at. I says, George, do you really think those people are happy? Did you see the people? He says, you got to understand something. If you don't dream and you don't fantasize, if you don't project, then you don't know what you're missing. They haven't been any place but here. This is their whole life. They worked in the shovel factory. They worked in the filling station. That's their life. The television in the day and at night, that's their life. So if you don't know anything else is out there, then you don't feel that somehow you've missed it. It's like the person doesn't want to go to bed early because they're afraid they'll miss something, yet they're not participating in anything. Did you ever do that as a kid? You know, you don't want to go to bed early because someone is out there doing something, and somehow you're figuring if you stay up late, you know, you're somehow a part of it. Right? We don't like to be out of things, and yet we don't do a whole lot to join it, but then again, it's a ritual. By believing in these talk shows like Oprah, we are a part of we're belonging to something. We're belonging to the human suffering club of people who are dysfunctional, but not as much as we are, so we can empathize and feel sorry for ourselves or be critical of something that we can show that we're better because they're so bad. They never bring, do you ever see anyone says, hey, my guest today, a very healthy, happy, balanced person. Click, televisions go off all across America. Man, I don't want to see that crap. That is depressing. No, give us the warped ones. And he was right, because when I asked some of the people, I got together and I told the guy in the newspaper the next day, I decided to stay an extra day just to see if this would work. I said, I'm willing to help anyone from my hometown that I graduated with who would like to start their life over. I'll help them financially. I'll help them with career. It'll cost them nothing. Anything in the world they want to do, I'll help them get started. Not a single person wanted to even talk about it, except George. And George says, Gary, hey, I don't have to be anywhere the rest of my life. So I'm willing to do anything. And he did. He's gone through a whole metamorphosis, whole cleansing, detoxification. Now he's into life, but in a constructive way. He's aware of his standards, and he's trying to raise them by being around people who have higher standards. And it's very painful. Do you know what it's like when you suddenly have to be disciplined when you weren't? You have to be careful about respecting other people's feelings instead of just saying something that might be perceived as hurtful or insensitive, when before you just say anything, thinking, well, it's my house, I'll say anything. You know, and now you got to take your shoes off when you walk in, and you got to actually clean up the dishes, or someone says, what are these dishes doing here? Why are they here? Instead of cleaned it and put away. And suddenly little things like that. Why didn't you raise the toilet seat? Should someone sit on a toilet seat that you've urinated on? No. Why is it anybody else using a shower in this house would clean it afterwards out of respect for the next person, and you just let all the scum from, did you ever look at a shower? How many people clean it? It's interesting, these little things are what really matter to most people. It's not the big thing that's the big problem that causes us to get all bent out of shape. There are no real big major things. It's the thousand of little things that show a lack of respect and a lack of attention and a lack of equality and a lack of concern, a lack of commitment that dishonor us in tiny bits and pieces, especially after we've tried to raise ourselves and raise our standards so that life functions better. And then someone comes in and disrespects that. And this is true in a personal relationship as at work or any place else. If you're the only person at work that has a clean desk, watch how quickly your desk suddenly is no longer clean. Because if you want to stand out, you're not going to be accepted in that environment. So we start to acquiesce. But what happens if everyone's standard is higher than yours? When I'm training, I don't want to train with people slower than me. I want to train with people who are better than me, faster than me. That pushes me. I don't want to sit and have a conversation on an issue with someone who has nothing to add. I want to be with someone smarter. Get with people whose standards are better than yours or more specific and stronger, so you have to raise yourself up. That it means that you're stretching, you're trying. If all you do is keep looking for people who will be at your level or lower, you're going to keep sinking. Now, what else do we care about that we're not actualizing? Huh? The homeless, we don't do anything to change. Ourselves. That's the whole issue. Shouldn't we count? Shouldn't we be the center of our lives? Shouldn't our time and effort and energy be prioritized to what's important to us? Otherwise, one day you wake up and suddenly it's 2 years, it's 5 years, it's 20 years, and you haven't spent time on you. Everything else got your attention and emotions, but you didn't. And then you get angry inside, and then you get resentful, or then you start to burn up, or you self-implode. That's not good, and that's not healthy. Lies don't happen in single areas of life. Lies become patterns of behavior that we use for surviving in what we consider unacceptable areas. So we begin a pattern of lying, but then we begin to believe our own lies. But you never convince the spirit to accept a lie. That's why the spirit is always registering what is true. That's why I can tell if anything's good for you. I can put a food up to you, and you hold it, and I say, is this good for you? And if it's not good for you, even a healthy food, you'll become weak, and the arm will go right down. If it's good for you, you stay strong. Remember, it is better to acknowledge that you are a racist and to know where you are beginning to make your change and to honestly try to change than to deny that you are racist and continue to live with the pretense of being acceptable to other cultures or beliefs when in point of fact you are not. Because in 5 years, one person will still be at the same level, not integrating their thoughts, not receiving ideas from other people, where the one person will have managed to let go of those beliefs and progress. That's why understanding what the foundation is within your being is where all change occurs. And that's why we're starting with what you care about. Because if you don't really care about you, then all the changes are going to be immaterial. A lot of people care about other people's needs being met so they can maintain their position within that person's world. So when they say, I have no time, Gary, to be healthy, I have no time, I have no energy, it's because they're taking care of other people's needs rather than their own. As a result, there's no energy left for them, so they're not honest. So I could give them counseling and classes and diet and stress management and everything that you would think would make a difference. And it does to a healthy person. It does not to a person who hasn't made their life count. So making your life count is where it all starts. And that means you've got to ask yourself, what have I prioritized that is not allowing me to count first? Now, why I ask this question about what we're attracted to is because sometimes we're attracted to things or people for the wrong reasons, sometimes for the right reasons. But you made a very important point over here about needing people. That's a very valid point. It's okay to need things from people. There's nothing wrong with that. But let's now be clear about what we need. Are the things that we need from another person essential to being a healthy person and a happy person? Or are they creating in any way a codependent relationship? Are we needing someone to reinforce who we are, and then what are we giving in return? Let's face it. What is one of the biggest aggravations in any relationship? What are some of the aggravations? Dishonesty. Why is dishonesty, why does it bother us in a relationship, and why is honesty so important?
Betrayal.
What is a person betraying when they're dishonest? Their character, their trust. What else?
Us.
They're betraying us, which means what? There is no equality there. So let's say you're attracted to someone. Let's say you're sexually attracted to someone. So you use the sex as a way of showing the person that you are a desirable person. And in our society, a lot of people use their sexuality as a bait, as a lure. And because they feel, if I can have sex and create a sense of intimacy, then this person will see how needful they should be of me. I will be supplying them essential needs, right? Because when it comes time to break up in any relationship, one of the first things we start thinking about is, what do I got to give up? You know, what's not going to be there? Good sex, not going to be there. Good food's not going to be there. Taking care of my house is not going to be there. Okay. Whoa. Now, if you're an average guy and you think that you're not going to have someone taking care of your food, your house, and your sex, that's a lot of stuff, right? And that alone, for most men, will be say, hey, I don't care what else is going on. I'll stick with this. Right? I mean, if you're honest, that's correct, right? Why do you think so many people in our society have conditioned themselves to make themselves indispensable in areas where someone else is not? So they're compensating someone else's known weaknesses. They're trying to put themselves saying, look how good I am. Hey, I do all this work for you. And what in return are you getting? Now, in today's society, by the way, that works equally as well with men who also will do the same thing for a woman. So we have reversal roles going on. What else? What are some of the other things that people make themselves indispensable in our lives with?
Money.
Money, being the provider. How many homemakers, male or female, primarily male in our society, except for single parents, will use the fact that they are the money maker as a way of maintaining control in the relationship or dominance within the relationship instead of equality? And how does that make the other person feel?
Sometimes I like it that way.
Sometimes, that's right. We have a whole caste system in our society that believes that they don't deserve to be equal, right? I mean, if that weren't the case, you'd have an ERA today, wouldn't you? If that weren't the case, you'd have a female president today, wouldn't you? You better believe it. It's not men, it is women not knowing their own empowerment or actualizing it in a balanced and whole way. That's the paradigm. A paradigm that says you're a woman, you don't have the intellectual capabilities, you don't have the emotional capabilities, you don't have the financial capabilities, all of which are wrong, but that's what they've been led to believe. So as long as they stay in that paradigm, they got to accept that. That's the danger of paradigms. You must accept everything that's in it, because when you go to say, well, I only accept part of it, it doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. Then you got to believe in another paradigm. Then you go outside and say, all right, I'm giving this up. I'm abandoning this notion. I'm going to become a spiritual feminist or a political feminist and believe in self-empowerment and work on issues that empower my gender. What's the percentage of feminists compared to non-feminists in America, would you think? It's like 1%. 1%. That's not a healthy percentage. That's why we don't have corporate CEOs that are more than 2% of females. But again, what comes with that being in this paradigm? There's certain advantages. What are some of the advantages that make it seem so appealing to people not to change? You don't have to take responsibility. Who's taking responsibility then? Others are taking it for you. So you're made to feel what? Dependent. Society automatically creates a dependency, and if the society makes you feel that you are dependent on it, then you're not going to be self-reliant. You're only going to continue with those basic skills that allow you to have a position in the relationship, a position in the family that is important. But even that changes. Why do you think so many women now go through crisis when their children leave home? Why? Why? They had no one for them to depend upon or to be dependent for. What else? What else? Comfort. Yeah? Physically and emotionally. What else?
Purpose.
Huh?
I have another issue I want to bring up here.
When the children leave, there's like purpose. There's no real purpose for them in their life.
If the purpose of your relationship was to have a family, and the family is gone, and you haven't made yourself the purpose of your life, then there's a depression. Now you got to start finding something to believe in. Because if the husband now and you are staying together simply because you've been together, but if you're not sharing any more of that joy and happiness, now it's not saying that you cannot have joy and happiness in a family and make it all work. That is absolutely not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you're one of the many who have it for the wrong reasons, now you wake up one day and you're 40, 42, 43, and you realize, I feel empty. I feel alone. I feel abandoned. And a lot of those mothers and fathers will continue to try to attach themselves or play a role in their adult's life. Has that happened to any of you? Where the parents continue to interject, want to be a part of your life? But in the same old way, not as a friend or a confidant, but meddling, and making decisions as if somehow you can't make your own decision. It's draining when your parents do it? You bet. By being aware of why we're attracted to someone, we can then start to be honest about, is that a healthy relationship? And what I'd like for you to do this week is to reevaluate what that association has been. Has it been a healthy one, a constructive one, or not? Have you had real needs met, or not? And it's okay to be attracted to someone because they're good looking. It's okay to be attracted to someone because they have a great body. There's nothing wrong with that. We shouldn't lie about these things. If we didn't think that was important, we'd let ourselves go. We'd all end up with, this kind of androgynous look to ourselves. But we don't. We do care about ourselves. But we also have to care about what's also beyond the looks, the nature of the person, whether they have a warm heart, whether they're caring and accepting. What are some of the qualities we do like about people and do endear us to having quality relationships and friendships? You mentioned honesty. If you don't have honesty and trust, then you have nothing else. Everything else will be less significant, no matter what other needs are being met. If you don't have someone you can trust, then you have been betrayed. So it doesn't matter if they're good sex. It doesn't matter if they're fun to be with. If we know that they're going to betray us, what's the purpose of being with them? And yet all the time, I know so many men, you can't believe how many men I know will be around some women who have betrayed them, but if they're good sex, then that's what a man thinks with. And that's dangerous. And I know women friends of mine who've been around men who are attractive and were good sex, and they allow that person into their lives instead of saying what else was there that was essential. And if you don't have the other essential, you don't have any intimacy. Because intimacy is not sexual. Intimacy is what you share of the nature that no one else knows about you. The openness. Why is it that you will not be open sometimes to the people closest to you? Why? Makes you vulnerable to the imperfections that person may not accept, especially in men. Men hate to be vulnerable when they feel that their vulnerability will be used against them. And in our society, you bet it will be used against them. And why don't women like to be open with people closest to them? Rejection. Because you see, if you're telling people what you really think and what you really feel and what's really essential to you, if others in your paradigm have learned not to believe in the same thing, then they must reject that as being acceptable thoughts or behavior. So once again, your belief system dictates how much you can actually be honest with someone and about what. What is proper behavior? What is improper behavior? What's a good thought? What's not a good thought? It doesn't matter whether or not your good thought is good for you. It has to be good for your paradigm, your belief system. I was out running yesterday with a bunch of guys, and one of these guys is an artist. And out of the clear blue, this guy's, and he's very witty, and he's very open, and he started telling us things that two of the other guys absolutely shocked them. Absolutely shocked them. And then when they all left, these other two guys and I were still running, and one guy was saying, I can't believe he told us those things. I said, why not? He's a very open person who doesn't fear anyone. Also, his belief system is that autonomous. You and I will not change his life. We will not affect his life. He is not afraid of us. Therefore, he's willing to be open and share his innermost feelings. He is not competing with us. And I said to the guy, wouldn't it be nice if you could say the most open thing, your open secrets without fear, that in any way you would be rejected because of them? And the guy says, man, I have too many things that if I told people, they'd become some kind of kook. But think of the worst things that you've ever thought, wanted to do, believed in, and try to share that with someone. The likelihood is that you would be rejected or scorned or ridiculed or mocked or thrown out of whatever belief system you have. So as a result, we have a pathology within our society where people have one side of themselves they show and express, and another they don't. It was some time ago, it was about 5 years ago, I was doing a special on who goes to prostitutes. I find these things interesting. It's not the sexual act that is interesting to me, it's the reason why. In other words, why would a person go and spend $500 or $1,000 to have some kind of relationship that our society does not approve of? I'm not opposed to prostitution. I think it should be legalized. It would make a lot more sense. First, it would help stop a lot of women from being brutalized and beaten and keep them out of drugs and from being pimped. And it would allow them a way, if they chose, to help their bodies from being disease-ridden. Otherwise, you look at what one prostitute can do to infect people who then take that infection home and end up infecting their wives or their children. And then you ask, what if this could have been prevented? In any case, I interviewed about 15 street prostitutes who none of them were honest with me, and some callgirls, and some escorts. And the most interesting one of all was this escort who told me that her primary clients don't have sex with her, at least not after the first time. first time they think it's kind of a prerequisite, but then she says she sees men once a week, and once they feel confident and comfortable with her, they just talk. I said, what do they talk about? Simple things. They talk about things with me that they are afraid to talk with their wives about or their buddies about. I said, who are these men? Well, they're from all backgrounds, but a lot of them are in positions that you would consider management, government. They're people who are afraid to talk with people around them because they have an image to maintain. And what they tell me shows that there's uncertainty, fear in their lives, and they can't project that anywhere else. Because even their families have this idea that they're this provider who's strong and, you know, forceful and dynamic, and maybe that's not them at all. And she says, I know some men who, to the world, these are very dynamic, outgoing people, but to me, they're very terrified little boys. And I'm the only person who's not going to use this against them. And she says, it's interesting how much better they feel after they've had a chance. She said, I'm like their therapist. She says, I don't even want to take money for this. She says, I feel badly. And she said that's why she finally got out of it. She stopped because she said she would just spend all this time listening to him and talking with him. And it wasn't as if they wanted her to answer their questions. They just wanted someone to talk with. And she said that what a society we have when these people are terrified that if anyone knows about their real inner feelings, they will use it against them. But that's the kind of predatory nature we have out there. We don't allow anyone to be vulnerable. I mean, so you can imagine what it's like if they will do this to people in that position. Anybody who has authority is going to be a target. They will be the cause of other people's resentment. Anyone in a hierarchical order, and all society is based upon hierarchical orders. So you may not condemn the CEO of a corporation, you may never see them, but your foreman is the person who's no longer a part of you. You won't see the foreman hanging out with the people that they're working with because there's this artificial separation. Now, and this is how society works. It shouldn't, but that's part of what we should be paying attention about. What role do people have in our lives, and is it a healthy role, constructive or destructive? Now, where do we fear attachments? How does this fear affect us or others? What are some of the things we fear attachments? Where do we fear attaching? Getting close to someone, then having a rejection or being left out. We're terrified that if we start a relationship on any level, business or personal or family, and then there's a crisis or rejection, that we're now no longer a part of it. That's one. Men have a terrible time with the idea of attachments, because with the attachment in our society comes a intensity of relating that a lot of people don't want to be open to. They don't want that intimacy. We have a unique situation of wanting to be autonomous and intimate at the same time. We want the benefits of attachment and relating and having our needs met, but we also want to be able to step aside and say, my needs are met, I don't feel like being intimate now. And well, that's very difficult when one person is using the intimacy to draw the strength of the relationship into them, and the other person is using intimacy as a way of establishing their needed and then taking a step back from the relationship. Do you see the paradox? Now, since women, generally speaking, are conditioned to enjoy the intimacy and openness within a relationship and to share their feelings and emotions, and men have been conditioned not to share their feelings and emotions, then you have two separate beliefs trying to come together. And sometimes it works, in the majority of cases it doesn't, because one of the most common problems in most relationships is what? Lack of communication, right? And you can't communicate if you don't have equality. And what is equality based upon? What is one of the, Respect. And respect for what? For the other person. And what in the other person are you respecting? a reflection of your inner needs. The reason you're drawn to another person is because in the other person you reflect in what you ideally see in yourself or you need in yourself. The other person becomes the surrogate you. You're not attracted to someone that you don't want to be fulfilled by, you don't have attraction to, so you take your fantasies, and let's face it, we have the fantasy of what the other person will fulfill or be. When you're thinking about being with someone, one of the first things you think about is what's going to be fulfilled, right? Emotionally, sexually, in some way we fantasize about that. That's what keeps this allure going. And it's that allure, that contemplation, that expectation, that heightens us, that gives us that euphoria of being a part of someone. Why do we want to be a part of someone to the point where we will fantasize about it, think about it, feel it, actually have physical feelings that vibrate in us? And it's not just sexual, on a lot of different levels. Why did Rudy, the football player wanting to go to Notre Dame, but was too small, a little short guy, why did he have these kind of euphoric feelings that allowed him to go out there and be beaten and beaten and beaten in practice, and yet he continued to persevere until he finally made the team in his last year at Notre Dame and played one game? Why? That was a feeling. He was attached to something. Why do people want to belong to a club or a sorority or a fraternity or a political party or a nationalistic position? Why? Why do you want to be attached to something? Verifies who you are, makes you feel connected. You don't feel lonely. You feel you're a part of something. You're identified. Suddenly you count because you're a part of something. Even if you're one member in a million members, it represents a part of your feelings. If it's the rifle club, the rifle association, and you suddenly feel that you're part of something that's important. Now, you may not in any other area of your life be connected to anything. You may be a loner, but you may get all your club membership and go to their meetings, and that connects you. I was down at recently when I was in Texas, I was asked to lecture at a meeting of the Rotary Club. When the Rotary Club does a lot of good. And it's, by the way, it's not to assume for a second that these clubs and organizations should not be members. You know, you shouldn't belong to them. They're completely legitimate. It's maintaining our autonomy to make decisions for ourselves and still be a member. The difference is some allow you that and some don't. Some have some flexibility, you can join or quit. But you can't stay in them and oppose them. Then you're automatically excluded. So there's a tacit understanding that if you're going to join anything, that you better accept that which you're joining almost unconditionally. So you give up almost all your critical feelings about what doesn't work. And that's why, for instance, when people are supporting a presidential person like, let's say, Ross Perot or Bush, you have to be accepting the person even when their obvious limitations should be paid attention to. You must reject that because you have committed yourself. Remember, anything you commit yourself to, you're committing your identity as a person to it. That's why we have a corporate culture that all dress the same, act the same, speak the same, because they've committed themselves to that culture. But that's true of any belief system. So what we are is reflected in what we belong to. So if you look at what a person belongs to, frequently you can get a very good handle on who they are. I mean, look at some of the people who belong to anti-cultural movements. Like some of the vegetarian society, that's a movement. People belong to that. The natural hygiene movement, the yoga movements. They will adapt much of their lifestyle to accepting the principles of that movement. And others, the same. I've lectured at all these movements, from the Daughters of the American Revolution to the Rotary, Kiwanis, and they all will show you the importance of their organization, and all of them have something to contribute. But it doesn't mean that the people running them are always balanced or doing the right thing. But even when they're not, you almost never see change occurring, because dominance within any order maintains the power and control. It never works from the bottom up, it's always from the top down. And that's why people sometimes out of frustration will leave a party, leave a group, leave a sorority, a fraternity or a club or a guild or a movement and join something else. I've met people who've gotten out of the animal rights movement because of some of the acts of people or some of the philosophies. Like going down one time at Macy's, and as people were coming out of the meat department, they were throwing some dye on these people. And I said, that's irresponsible. I said, Mother Teresa eats meat. Are you going to condemn her? She's a good person. I said, you may not believe in what she does, or that woman there. That woman may be wearing a fur coat, and you can say, how dare you? You know, you shouldn't be killing those animals. Well, philosophically, you can share a difference, but you should not assume that you have the right to automatically or physically assault that person and change them. We don't have that right. That's transgressing a boundary. And as a result, a lot of people will not join that movement because of how extreme its members will go, or what how they present themselves. You know, you ask the average American, why haven't you become a vegetarian? They'll say, I haven't become a vegetarian because I don't want to look like them, I don't want to sound like them, I don't want to, you know, be like them. You know, macrobiotics, you know, could you imagine a whole movement based upon mishokushi? You know, well, you know, look at these people. These people don't look healthy. And listening to them is very difficult for the average person. But different groups have a philosophy that by intent is frequently so extreme from anything else that it makes its members feel exclusive and unique. And therefore, by being a macrobiotic or being a vegan or being a natural hygienist or being in the anti-war movement, you have to take on frequently not only the image, but the dress, the behavior, and you have to accept the extremes within it. Well, what about the person that doesn't want to do that? Then they have to, in effect, take the philosophy that does work with that movement, take it outside of there, and as an autonomous person, go ahead and try to create something on their own in the way of change. What this meeting is about, what our whole series of meetings is about, is finding ways to become an autonomous person so that you do not have to feel limited by anything that up to this point you have believed in that does work in part or doesn't work in part. You can take what does work, make it work on your own, and simply let go of what doesn't work. Same thing in a relationship. Everything in a relationship is not going to work. But it's okay as long as what must work to meet your essential needs is what's important. If other things don't work, but they're not really essential to your needs, that's all right. You simply accept that it's not going to be that way. If I know, for instance, in a relationship someone's going to always be late, but if that's not important to me, then I don't get upset about it. I simply say, you know, that's all right. I accept it. I just don't make it important. But if that's very important, then I can't have a relationship with a person who's going to be late, because all I'm going to do is constantly be angry at the person, and that's going to upset the balance of what is shared, including respect for the relationship or equality in the relationship. And that's also true of any organization. By the way, as an example of this, there must be about 25 to 27 million people currently starting their own businesses from their homes because they could no longer work in that structure out there, that 9-to-5 structure, because their essential needs were no longer being met, the quality of work was not being maintained, and the inner spirit was not being fueled. I just spoke with someone early this morning who called me from Texas who said, Gary, I've got a great business going, and I want you to tell people in New York because maybe they could do the same thing up there. I said, what's that? Well, I got the idea that everyone is interested in health, but they want to take an easy way to approaching it. So I make up juices, a menu of juices, and I make it in all kinds of sizes, from gallons to pints, and I make it fresh each day, and then I go around to corporations and to businesses and restaurants, and I sell it to them in big containers. And it's easier and quicker than they can make it themselves, and it gives me a nice income, and if I'm giving something in the way of health to the society, so I'm doing something good that I like, I'm making some money doing it, I'm maintaining my autonomy and independence, I set my own hours, sometimes I work longer than I would if I were 9 to 5, but I don't mind it because I'm working for me, what's important to me. And I like this. And I thought that's a great idea. You know, someone in New York should do the same thing. You know, it's just one of a million ideas, but that's what's going on in America right now. People taking their ideas and actualizing them outside of the paradigm, but not so outside, they're still able to have some input into the paradigm. As long as you're still connected to the paradigm in some way that you were a part of, you can still function. Now the idea is, do we stay within our belief systems and try to work within them for change, Or do we get outside of the belief system and find another belief system? Now, it's not always right that you're going to get out of one relationship and find a better one. Unless you change, you're going to find one very similar to the one you left. You get out of one career, you're going to go into another one. If you think there's no problems in different careers, every single career has its problems. Every single business has its problems. What you've got to learn is how can you be the best you can be within a paradigm without taking in the negatives of the paradigm and accepting the good parts. We have a right to do that. So it's no longer a matter of reject it and drop out, get high, and float away, as people did in the 60s, which I thought was rather stupid. Because I said, look, you're rejecting everything that you believed in. Yes, there's a lot that was wrong, but there was a lot that was right. You're saying none of it mattered. You want to be away from it. Well, why not take what worked and continue to work inside of it? They said, no, then you're compromising. Everything in life is a compromise. Living in New York is a compromise. But it doesn't mean that you've compromised what is essential. If you're creative, then you can transform any problem. You can make, instead of reforming yourself to adapt to bad circumstances, you can transform a circumstance so it works for you. And yet they never got that idea because they wanted, again, they want to be away from it. Well, think before you get away from everything. Think what it is that you're getting away from, and there's always something of benefit, and what can you learn and take with you? Now, what or to whom do we yearn to belong? In a club, a tribe, a fraternity, or a secret society, political party, a health organization, or movement? We are identifying with something in there, a sense of belonging, a sense of being connected to. When people feel very alone, when people feel that their ideas are not being expressed, when they feel powerless, they'll generally join an organization that in some way is manifesting power. That's why it was so easy for Hitler to come to power. That's why it was easy for Nixon to maintain power and others, because the more helpless people feel, the greater the energy they want to see in the organization they belong to, exercising power so they no longer feel powerless. They're connected to that. They belong to something that has power. But that shows a sociopathology. That shows a whole group of people in a society aren't dealing with what's wrong with them. The same is true in a relationship. Generally speaking, here's how it works. And this is why you should look carefully at your relationships. Wherever you feel weak within your inner being, whatever's not actualized and changed in your inner soul, that's exactly what you're going to start looking for in the person that you're drawn to. And that does not mean that that person is then going to take away your problems or pain. In our society, that person will try to be responsible for you. And that's the payback. You're in pain, you're insecure, you're uncertain, then the man starts, as an example, and it can be reversed also in women, the same in women, but I'll use the male model as an example. The male will say, well, don't worry about what you don't know. I'm successful. I have the intellect. I can figure things out. Be there to help me and be my emotional support, and I will get us through us. We'll do it. And suddenly, to a lot of people who are very concerned about their own sense of non-self, it's a nice fit. There's comfort in that. Why do you think in our society people are so frequently drawn to the most dynamic men or women? Rarely are we drawn to the weakest, even if the weakest is the nicest. Now, like it or not, that's not an intellectual game. That's reality. That's partly primordial. That's partly the primordial instinct of wanting to be with the dominant. And no matter how you cut it, the majority of people are always drawn to the most dominant, male or female. Yes. I'll see you all next week.